You can be doing everything right and still feel like nothing is actually moving. You're putting in the effort, you're learning, adjusting, trying to improve. From the outside, it looks like progress should be happening. But internally, it feels the same patterns, the same limits, the same sense that something just isn't shifting. And after a while, it starts to become personal. You begin to wonder if you're missing something, if you're the problem, if there's something you're not seeing or not doing well enough. Because when effort doesn't lead to change, the mind tries to solve it by doing more. More thinking, more pushing, more trying to get it right. But what if the issue isn't what you're doing? What if it's the state you're doing it from? Because if that doesn't change, it doesn't matter how much effort you apply, your experience tends to stay the same. We're taught to believe that if we do the right things, life responds accordingly. Set the right goals, take the right actions, stay consistent enough, and results should follow. And to some extent, that's true. Action does matter, but it's not the full picture. Because if it were, more effort would always lead to more progress, and that's not what most people experience. Instead, what you start to notice is something quieter, but far more consistent. Two people can take similar actions, have similar intentions, even similar levels of effort, and get completely different results. Not because one is trying harder, but because they're operating from a different internal state. What most approaches don't account for is that your nervous system is constantly determining what feels safe to experience. Not logically, not based on what you want, but based on what it has learned to regulate. And that matters more than most people realize, because what feels safe is what you naturally allow into your life, what you can stay present with, and what you can actually sustain without pushing it away. So you can want more success, more connection, more opportunity, but if those things don't feel safe in your system, they tend not to stay. They might appear briefly, but something shifts internally. Tension rises, doubt appears. You pull back or overcorrect or create friction without realizing it. And from the outside, it can look like inconsistency or self-sabotage. But from the inside, it's simply regulation. Your system is trying to return you to what feels familiar, manageable, and controlled. So when we say that reality responds to your state, this is what we're pointing to. Not a mindset in the usual sense, but the deeper physiological baseline that shapes how you perceive, respond, and engage with life. Because that baseline quietly determines what you notice, what you move toward, what you avoid, and what you're able to hold on to when it arrives. And until that changes, you can keep adjusting your strategy, your thinking, your effort, but your results will tend to organize around the same internal pattern. If you start to look at your life through this lens, you begin to see the same pattern showing up in very different areas. Take money, for example. Someone works harder, becomes more disciplined, starts making more, and for a moment, it looks like things are changing. But internally, something else starts to happen. There's more pressure, more tension, a subtle sense of instability. And without realizing it, they begin to make decisions that bring things back down, spending differently, hesitating on opportunities, pulling back at the wrong moment. From the outside, it can look like inconsistency, but from the inside, it's a system trying to return to what feels manageable. The same thing shows up in relationships. Someone meets a person who is actually aligned, present, available, consistent, and instead of it feeling easy, it feels unfamiliar. There's a kind of restlessness, a sense that something is missing, even when nothing is wrong. So they start to create distance. They question the connection. They focus on small issues that wouldn't normally matter. And again, it can look like self-sabotage. But what's really happening is that their system is more familiar with intensity or unpredictability than it is with stability and safety. So it moves back toward what it knows. You see it with clarity and direction as well. People try to figure out what they're meant to do. They think about it constantly. They analyze every option. But the more they think, the less clear things feel. Because clarity doesn't come from pressure. It comes from a settled system that can actually perceive what's there. When the system is activated, everything gets filtered through urgency, doubt, or fear. So even if the direction is there, it becomes harder to recognize. Across all of these examples, the pattern is the same. It's not that people are failing. It's that something deeper is organizing their experience. A baseline that determines what feels normal, what feels safe, and what feels like too much. And whenever life begins to move beyond that baseline, something in the system responds, not to punish or block progress, but to regulate, to bring things back to a level it knows how to handle. So when things start to go well and then suddenly shift or fall apart, it's easy to think something went wrong. But often nothing went wrong at all. You simply moved beyond what your system is currently organized to hold. And until that changes, the same pattern can repeat, even in completely different forms. Different job, same pressure. Different relationship, same dynamic. Different goal, same internal experience. Because the surface is changing, but the underlying state is not. And that's why effort alone doesn't resolve it. Because effort operates on the surface, but what's shaping your experience is happening underneath that, in how your system relates to what's actually happening. And once you begin to see that clearly, the question starts to shift. It's no longer, what do I need to do differently? It becomes, what is my system actually organized around right now? At this point, the orientation starts to shift. Because if your experience is being shaped by your internal state, then the solution isn't to keep adding more effort on top of it. It's to begin working with the state itself. Most people try to change their life by doing more. More strategy, more action, more pressure to get it right. But when that effort is coming from tension, from urgency, from a system that doesn't feel safe, it doesn't actually create expansion, it creates more contraction. So what looks like progress on the surface often carries strain underneath it. And over time, that strain either leads to burnout or it pulls things back to what feels manageable. This is where the idea of capacity becomes central. Capacity is what determines what you can receive, what you can stay present with, and what you can actually sustain without needing to control or reduce it. It's not about how much you can achieve. It's about how much you can hold without your system becoming overwhelmed. Because if something exceeds your capacity, your system will respond. It might create doubt. It might create hesitation. It might create the need to slow things down or step away. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because it doesn't yet feel safe to maintain. So instead of asking, how do I get more? The question becomes, how do I become someone who can hold more? And that shift changes everything. Because now the focus moves from chasing outcomes to expanding the container that those outcomes can live in. This is where the process begins to unfold differently. Safety comes first, not as an idea, but as something your system can actually feel. From there, presence becomes possible. You're no longer bracing or pushing against what's happening. And in that presence, you can begin to make real contact with your experience, with what's actually here, rather than what you're trying to force. That contact allows integration. Your system starts to update what it can handle. And over time, capacity naturally expands, not through force, but through familiarity. And as that capacity changes, your life begins to change with it. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer limited in the same way you were before. At this point, it helps to move out of the idea and into your direct experience. So just pause for a moment. Bring to mind something you say you want. More money, a different kind of relationship, a clearer direction. And instead of thinking about how to get there, just imagine it already being here. Not in a distant, idealized way, but as if it were actually part of your life right now. And then notice what happens in your body. Not what you think about it, but what you feel. There might be a sense of openness, but often there's something else as well. A subtle tightening, a bit of activation, maybe even a quiet pull to step back or reduce it. And that response is important because that's not your mindset. That's not your level of effort. That's your system showing you what it's currently organized around. And whatever is happening there, that's what's shaping your experience more than anything else. Because if something feels like too much, even in a subtle way, you won't fully let it in. Or you might let it in briefly, but it won't feel stable. So instead of trying to override that response or push through it, you begin to work with it. You start to notice where there's contraction, where there's hesitation, where there's a sense of pressure, not to fix it, but to stay with it without immediately trying to change it. Because in that contact, your system starts to learn something new. that it can experience more without needing to protect itself in the same way. And over time, that begins to shift what feels normal. So, this isn't about forcing yourself into a different life. It's about becoming someone who can actually be present with what you say you want, without your system needing to pull you away from it. And that's where real change begins. So, this is where the conversation starts to change. Because most approaches focus on what you do, your habits, your mindset, your strategy, and those things matter, but they don't change what your system can actually hold. So you end up improving on the surface while something deeper stays the same. And that's why the results don't stabilize. What this work looks at is what happens when awareness, the nervous system, and real life are no longer treated as separate. Not something you think about, but something you experience directly, where you begin to notice your state in real time. You learn how to stay present as things expand instead of pulling back or pushing forward. And from there, change starts to happen in a different way. Not because you're trying to force it, but because the limits that were shaping your experience begin to shift. This is the foundation of everything that follows. Because once your state changes, your perception changes. Your responses change, what you allow changes. And over time, your life begins to organize around something new. So, this isn't about becoming someone different. It's about no longer being limited by the patterns your system has been holding in place. Because reality isn't responding to what you want or what you're trying to make happen. It's responding to the state you live from. And when that changes, what becomes possible changes with it.